Hello everyone, you're listening to The Right Side of Gaming. Today we're talking about Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the new Dungeons & Dragons themed set for Magic the Gathering. Now we don't know a whole lot of the cards in the set just yet. We haven't really gotten to the spoiler season. But we do know a few that they've sort of released as part of their teaser for the set. To start with, we have Portable Hole, a 1-mana white artifact. You don't really get a lot of colored artifacts, but they do show up every now and then. This one says whenever it enters the battlefield, you're going to exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls with a mana value of 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. And that seems like a very white card. You're going to exile something until this particular card leaves. Well, Portable Hole, when you look at Magic the Gathering, is basically just that. It is a hole you can carry around. You can throw it on the floor, like something out of one of those old Roadrunner Coyote cartoons or something. And you can hide people or things inside of it. And that really fits in with the card effect. You're looking to sort of hide a person or thing or whatever inside of it so that they can't get it until they get rid of the hole. Personally, I play a lot of EDH when I do play. So Portable Hole appeals to me because, one, it gets rid of their Soul Ring. There's a lot of mana rocks floating around, and I think there's been this push lately for them to go cheaper, down to 2 mana or less, which just happens to be what gets hit by Portable Hole. So taking out someone's Soul Ring or their Arcane Signet or something similar, I mean, you're probably going to get to do that regardless in a game, or there might be some other fun targets you can fling it at. Now we can actually take a look at Portable Hole itself in 5th edition, which is the edition I'm going to be comparing a lot of this stuff to because it's the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I realize a lot of the stuff we discuss has been around for decades and multiple editions, but I feel like just as a brand issue, they're going to be drawing influences from 5th edition specifically, if there's anything that they have to pick and choose from. Now there's things called a Bag of Holding, which I want you to remember that name because we're going to come back to it later, or a Handy Haversack, which is sort of the same thing, that a lot of adventuring parties get in D&D, where you just sort of hold all your stuff in this extra planar space. And Portable Holes are known for some of their interactions with them. I think it sometimes varies, and people debate as to what happens if you put a portable hole in a bag of holding or vice versa. In 5th edition, it opens up this astral plane and everyone sort of just gets sucked into it and you lose both items. But, it might be other things. I think in older editions, there might have also been some interesting stuff with a portable hole and an immovable rod, maybe, but it's been a while. But again, the card feels very on point because you're just looking to sort of stash a person or things or hide something in it for just a little bit. Next, we have Power Word Kill, which lets you destroy a non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creature. So there's a lot of stuff it can't kill, but otherwise, you're good. Now, if that seems like a lot of caveats, well, it is, but you have to balance it, especially when you're looking at the 5th edition version of the spell. In 5th edition, Power Word Kill is a 9th level spell. If you're not aware, 9th level is like the most powerful level of spells you can cast. So this is super advanced magic. And basically it looks at a creature and you're like, okay, you're going to say this word, and if it has a certain number of hit points or less, it just dies outright. Otherwise it has no effect. Now, angels, demons, devils, and dragons tend to be stronger, or at least we like to play them up as the more powerful creatures in our minds. The idea that maybe this Power Word Kill wouldn't kill them outright would make sense. And then, of course, you have to balance it out. When I think of just straight up kill spells in Magic the Gathering in black, I think we get a lot of just unrestrained, straight up destroy target creature at about 3. Murder comes to mind. Now it's 1 and 2 black, destroy target creature. And then you might get variations that add an effect or let you do something else too, but it's just a straight up destroy creature. So even though this might be a 9th level spell, since there's stuff it can't kill, it's balanced out at 2 mana. So we're just going to ignore the fact that we're casting one of the most powerful spells in Dungeons & Dragons for 2 mana. Next up, we have the Vorpal Sword, which you may have heard of if you've ever read Alice in Wonderland. The Vorpal Sword is what was used to kill the Jabberwocky. It sliced its head off. And you see that a lot in Dungeons & Dragons. I think in 4th edition, whenever you crit, you would actually keep rolling any damage die that came up, the highest number on the die. Otherwise, in other editions, it was always slice off their head. And that's the case in 5th edition as well. If you want to take a look at the 5th edition of Orpal Sword, it's a high-level magic weapon. And if you roll a 20, if you crit, you cut off their head, assuming that they have a head to cut off. I feel like this card gets that flavor. Whenever you equip it to a creature, it gets Death Touch, so it sort of kills things outright like you would with the Vorpal Sword if you crit. And it applies not only to creatures, but if you get enough mana and pump it into the sword, you can do the exact same thing with players. Whenever it deals damage to a player after you've paid 8 mana for it, you can wipe that player out of the game. I feel like that'll be a fun but not necessarily broken one to use in EDH because, one, you have to get it through to damage the player, which means using specific creatures or cards to let your creatures get past. You're going to have to spend 11 mana total, most likely. And there might be some ways to lower that, but you're looking at playing the card, equipping it to a creature, which probably has an additional cost anyway, and then paying the mana to wipe out one person at a time in what is normally a group game with multiple enemies. I imagine it'll be a fun one to use in draft. Games tend to go a little longer, so you're probably going to run into the sword at some point. Probably going to have the mana to pay for the secondary effect. And evasive creatures are really important in draft and sealed type events, so being able to push that damage through and just knock out your one other opponent would be good. Next, we have Prosperous Innkeeper, which may not seem like anything particularly special. There's one thing that's really important on here. Look at the creature type. It is a halfling. If you're not aware, a lot of your basic races in Dungeons & Dragons come from Tolkien. You have your humans, your dwarves, your elves, and your halflings. Because halfling is what they called hobbits, just so that they didn't get sued. And they did change them up a little bit. For example, halflings wear shoes. They don't have like the hairy feet. Weird enough. But this is the first halfling, I think, that we've ever seen in Magic the Gathering. So we have a new creature type that matches up to D&D. When they first announced it, I was like, oh, what are they going to do? Are they going to use Kithkin, which are kinda halfling-ish, but not really, as the halflings? Like, no, we're getting an actual halfling, which is good. Because I also expect to see your dwarves and elves. And I want you to remember the elf part in particular, because we're going to come back to that. But I like that we're getting some halfling love in there, and hopefully maybe a few of our other fantasy D&D races. Next up, we have Tiamat, which, if you're not aware, she is the evil dragon goddess. She has 5 heads, which are the 5 sort of evil dragon colors: white, blue, black, red, green, which just happen to also be the colors in Magic the Gathering. And she's going to let you search your library for up to 5 dragons not named Tiamat and add them to your hand. And I feel like you're going to get some extra flavor points if you get 5 different color of dragons, but that's just me. But it's really interesting to see that we're getting some of the big name characters from Dungeons & Dragons in here, so I'll be curious to see which other ones make it in. We might talk a little bit more about that later. But for now, big 5-color, 5-headed dragon, I think a lot of people are going to enjoy that. Now, these last few cards may not seem really impressive. I mean, they are basic lands. Not a whole lot of people really pay much thought to those. But these are the first ones with flavor text. And the idea is that it's the type of thing a dungeon master would tell their players. And you can get kind of an idea of some of the stuff that might be in the set just by reading through them. Red and green talk about dwarves and elves. Blue talks about the maelstrom. Black sort of alludes to the Underdark and mentions the drow. So there's still something we can get from the lands themselves. Naturally, it wouldn't be a modern D&D set if there weren't sort of alternate art cards. We have Borderless, Tiamat, your extended art, Vorpal Sword, and your buy box promo is actually a completely different art for it. But that, I'm going to admit, is really cool. And I guess if that's the Vorpal Sword, then this is our knight that's not Alice. We also have a very iconic monster that's been previewed that we don't really know anything about yet, other than the fact that it is black. If you're not aware of what this creature is, it's called a Beholder. Very powerful creatures that shoot magic from their various eyeballs. Yes, you can see they have the one big one in the middle, and then these numerous eye stalks. And it'll be really curious to see how they do this, because if you look at the Beholder creature, each of the different eyes can shoot a different magic effect. So I have to wonder if this is going to be a modal card where you can have different effects from it, or if they're sticking to a specific eye beam effect, basically. But it's also worth noting that in addition to sort of our regular creatures, the really iconic ones will come in their own alternate frame and arts that are supposed to be reminiscent of the really old school monster manual books. Now, if the Beholder wasn't enough for you, if we take a look at the packaging art, you're not aware what this is not Cthulhu, although I can see the influence. This is what's called a Mind Flayer. They're very powerful creatures that will literally suck your brain out. That's what they do. I think we can expect to see Mind Flayers, or at least a Mind Flayer, in the set as well, which makes sense. They're a very iconic creature in Dungeons & Dragons. I wouldn't be surprised if they also get sort of that alternate template treatment where they look like something from an old monster manual. I think it's definitely something that we're going to see. Of course, while we're talking about packaging and art, might be worth to look at this draft booster bundle. The person fighting the dragon is called Drist Do'Urden. He's kind of a meme in D&D because he's a popular character from a very popular series of books. But the joke now is that every drow ranger is Drist or a Drist clone because it's like, ooh, I'm a drow, I'm not evil, I've got 2 swords. No, if you're not into D&D, it's probably not a big deal. If you are, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And honestly, even then, it's not that bad. There's nothing wrong with copying or using a popular character for influence for your own character, using them as a pattern. But it's one of those where, for a while there, it seems like there were a lot of them, so people kind of picked up on it and use it as a joke. There's a good chance we'll get Drow in there. Pretty good chance we'll get Drist specifically. And I have to be curious if we aren't getting some of the stuff that goes with him. He has the 2 swords he's known for, Twinkle and Icing Death. I don't know if we're going to get those or if they're just going to be sort of part of Drist kit itself. If we do, maybe having a sword or 2 as artifact equipment could be interesting. He also has his little animal companion, which I think he summons using a magic item. We might get a card for her, or it might be one of those Drist creates a token type of deals. I originally was not going to try to say the name, because I'm going to be honest, I would probably butcher it. But I know in there they were talking about it being similar or taking influence from the word in another language for like Guinevere or Jennifer. So I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna make a tip at this. Gwenhwyvar. And someone out there is going to tell me I completely messed that up and correct me in the comments. I sincerely hope. Unless I actually got it right. But if not, please. I've only ever read it silently to myself. Pretty sure I butchered that, but I feel like I'm going to have to say it again at some point in my life. Of course, this isn't the first time that Wizards has done a crossover between D&D and Magic the Gathering. This is probably just the most ambitious one. In a previous set that honestly doesn't seem like it was that too long ago, we had Bag of Holding. I mentioned the magic item earlier. It's basically this bag, and you can stuff all your stuff in this extra planar space inside of it, so you can hold all your stuff without actually having to carry it around. So its weight doesn't carry on you. You don't have to like find space in all your pockets. It's just a great way to keep all your stuff. And the card itself did a great example of that. You sort of just exile stuff, so it's like it's in your extra planar space, and then later on you can basically pull stuff out of it. Some of the iconic spells have even made their way into Magic the Gathering. Fireball is a very popular one in D&D. Basically, you toss out this big ball of fire. Does a bunch of damage to everyone in an area, including yourself if you're in it, and your allies, which happens a lot more often than you might think. But surprisingly, not a lot of people care about setting their friends on fire. But it's been a card in Magic the Gathering since literally the first set. We've also had cards that aren't necessarily legal for play. You've seen the various sort of X and Y in Magic the Gathering, like Fire and Ice, Feast and Famine. Well, we had a Sword of Dungeons and Dragons, which gave protection from rogues and clerics. It would create dragons whenever dealt damage, and you'd even let you roll a d20, and if you crit, you got to repeat the process. So that's a very Dungeons and Dragons thing to do. Even the art stole from it. The little ampersand logo that they use as a dragon nowadays, I guess it's a dragon that they use as an ampersand in their logo, managed to make it on the hilt. And you even have the d20. I think it's a d20. Might be a d20. It's a die of some kind as the hilt on there, which was kind of cool. There was also a Dungeon Master card that they made a while back that they just gave to some of their employees. So like the Sword of Dungeons and Dragons, it's not legal for anything. Sword of Dungeons and Dragons, you notice, had that silver border. It means it was from an unset. Dungeon Master isn't really something that's widely available, though people make proxies and stuff for it. Now, I don't expect to get either one of them, but it's just fun to kind of note that this is some of the stuff that we've done before. But the Dungeon Master, if you're not familiar with this particular character, it's not just, oh, I play D&D, I act as the Dungeon Master. This is actually the specific Dungeon Master from a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon that they had years ago, where you had a bunch of kids that were sort of the various classes, and then a Dungeon Master. And it does a lot of stuff that you'd expect from both a Magic card and a D&D card. You know, it's making skeletons for them to fight. It's letting you roll a d20. And then at the very end, his little ultimate, you get an adventuring party, which is a fighter, a cleric, a rogue, and a wizard. And we're going to come back to that. So I like the theme of party because that's really big in D&D, and it's something we've seen in Magic the Gathering. Now, of course, Dungeon Master creates a fighter instead of a warrior. Warriors is what we normally see in Magic the Gathering. Fighter is what you normally see in D&D. But for the most part, it's about the same thing. Now, party is a mechanic we've seen recently in Zendikar Rising, which would make things cheaper or have effects based on how many creatures were in your party, which would include a cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. You can see that really matches up pretty well with the Dungeon Master. It really has that D&D feel to it, so a lot of people are wondering if this is going to come back, especially because it's one of those that I feel like you need more cards to take advantage of it to really make it worthwhile to try to run clerics, rogues, warriors, and wizards in your deck. Although I think a lot of people kind of cheat and get around that by using shape changers and stuff. But at any rate, it's definitely something that has a very Dungeons and Dragons feel to it. So even if it doesn't fit in or come from the set itself, it's one of those that I think will play well just if you want to make a D&D flavored deck. Other people have wondered if we're not going to get a level up mechanic again or something similar to it, because again, that's one of the big things about Dungeons & Dragons. You have your adventuring party, yes, and they're all trying to fight things and level up. I think this is one of those that scored pretty high on the storm scale. I'm not sure if we're really going to see it again, but I think it's one of those where I can at least see where they're coming from, and it would be flavorful if nothing else. But the idea is you pay mana to put these level up counters on there, and you gain additional effects or abilities or power, toughness, or whatever based on what level your creature is. Personally, I'd like to see some more of the iconic monsters make their way into the set. Mimics are a fun one. Something that might look like, say, a treasure chest normally, but then your players go to touch it or open it up or something, and it turns out to be a monster. We already know that there's going to be some treasure tokens in the set because we saw those with our halfling, the prosperous innkeeper. So treasure tokens, treasure chest mimics. I feel like that would be something you could reasonably include. I feel like demogorgons are kind of a hot ticket right now. Not sure if you can see the whole name, but it's Demogorgon. If this doesn't look familiar to you, it's okay, it's understandable. They're very popular right now due to a specific TV show that took a little bit more. They took a little bit different interpretation to it, but again, it's still called a Demogorgon. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of those, specifically one of these, happened to make their way into the set. Of course, it might be kind of fun to see some balance out of the set in terms of what goes in. We've already seen Tiamat. She's the evil dragon goddess, and she has a counterpart in Bahamut, the lawful good platinum dragon. And he's sort of the good version of Tiamat, and they're at odds. So it'd be kind of fun to see him in the set as well, so we can have those two duke it out. And while we're talking about the various gods of the Forgotten Realms, we've already seen Drist in there. He is a drow. The drow worship Loth, the spider goddess. And you can see a picture of her here. It's literally the upper half is a drow woman, and the lower half is literally a giant spider. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw her or something similar. They have sort of mortal versions called Driders in there, where again, it's a drow upper half and a spider bottom half, although they aren't gods or anything. But I feel like that would be something thematic and very Drist-y to go in there, and especially if you're trying to sort of play up the Forgotten Realms Drist connection. It doesn't necessarily have to be creatures, Magic Missile is probably one of the most iconic spells in the game. I would be very surprised if we didn't get a Magic Missile spell card in there somewhere, an instant or sorcery. It'd be a great way to just slip in a little something. It's a force damage effect, so I would not even be surprised if it was like a colorless damaging sorcery, although I feel like they're trying not to do stuff like that. But we did see them expand a little bit on colorless sorceries and instants and stuff with Strixhaven and their lesson cards. This might actually be a good time to slip in something that would be fitting for Magic Missile. It doesn't have to be the big, powerful, or like the really main stuff either. Can we get just a little love for kobolds? I mean, come on, these guys are really struggling here. They don't really have a whole lot. They did get one new card recently, that Rograk, son of Roga. But a lot of these are some pretty old cards, and if you want to run him commander, I think he's kind of a thing. But you're probably using Prosh and making a bunch of Kobolds of Kirkeep, which are these little dudes down here. And he mentions them a little bit, but they are like the, fodder enemies in D&D. You're low level, you're probably fighting a lot of either goblins or kobolds, or maybe your DM gets a little more creative. But for a lot of people, it's goblins or kobolds or something like that. Like a D&D set would be a great place to finally give these guys a little love, don't you think? Now, if you're one of those people that wants to focus on things that we actually know we're getting, which is understandable, we are getting 4 commander decks out of it. Aura of Courage, which I assume is going to be sort of like our heroes with a bunch of aura cards on them. Dungeons of Death, which screams black. Aura of Courage is probably going to be like white, blue, or maybe have some red in there or something. I don't know. Dungeons of Death is definitely going to be a black thing. It's probably going to have a bunch of your monsters, especially your D&D type monsters in there. Draconic Rage, that doesn't scream red, and dragons, I don't know what does. And then Planar Portal, which is probably going to have some stuff about the different planes in there somehow. Now, if you're not aware, when we talk about different planes in D&D, it's not like going from one world to an entirely different world. Like we have Ravnica and Theros and all those others. It's not quite that simple. We'll have stuff like the actual world itself, and then you might have something like the Feywild, and it sort of bleeds into it a little bit. It's not necessarily this entirely separate thing. Same thing with the Underdark. And then you might have stuff that represents not necessarily other worlds, but sort of different planes of existence, like their version of heaven and hell, or your elemental planes and things like that. But I expect there's going to be some influence of those in there. We're also going to be getting these double-sided dungeon cards, which I know you get a couple of those in your pre-release kit. So I have to wonder what exactly those are. They haven't really given us any examples yet. We had the Planar Chaos cards, where you had these different planes you go to, and they'd have some effect on the game, while you were playing it. Or if you think back to Theros and M15, you had these challenge decks where you would play against sort of these NPC enemies almost. The deck would play itself, and you would, for example, fight this Hydra, and you have to destroy all the heads to win. Or kill all the Minotaurs, or finish off Xenagos. And then they had this oversized Garrick Planeswalker card in M15 after that you could sort of play against the same way. So I don't know if it's going to be something like that, but it'd be really fun either to have these dungeon cards that you can, just add to a game for extra effects, or maybe it's own game that you can play against. I don't know. But it'd be kind of fun just to see what they do with that, and maybe get some more of that little more narrative play added into Magic the Gathering. Doubly so if it's cooperative play, kind of like these challenger decks. You would actually get these little hero cards you could add to your deck. They just sort of started out on the field and had an effect, and you could use them every now and then. Sometimes it's continuous, sometimes it's like a once per game type of deal. But having a hero that you would play with your deck, and you would do cooperative. I mean, you could play them solo. You could play solo against, the Hydra, the Horde, Xenagos, whatever. Or you could team up with your friends and do it that way and have sort of a co-op mode, which, again, feels very Dungeons and Dragons-y, because you have your heroes, you have your deck, which is like your spells or abilities or whatever. You're playing cooperative against the enemies. It'd be really fun to see something like that with the dungeon cards return. So if you're really excited about this, like I am, the set itself comes out on July 23rd, which is, I think, about 2 months from now. Pre-release is going to be July 16th. I think some places are already taking pre-orders. You can keep an eye on the actual Wizards website itself for more news, and then wherever your preferred spoiler website is, just to see cards as they get spoiled and released, although I think we're still a little ways away from that. I don't know when they started these days, but I think they still have to spoil the, Modern Horizons 2 before then. So I think we still have a ways to go before that starts. Regardless, I think that's all I had for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to leave a like, comment, subscribe, that'd be great. especially if you just want to share some D&D stories or talk about what you're hoping to see in the set or anything along those lines. That would be great. I love talking about D&D. I love talking about Magic. Getting to put the two of them together is really fun for me, and I encourage you guys to chat it out to your heart's content. And if you don't want to, that's okay too. I understand. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.